Survival's not the end game, the journey's where you are. You've never wanted perfect, you just wanted my heart. And the story isn't over if the story isn't good. And failure's never final when the Father's in the room. And failure's never final when the Father's in the room. Ooh, lay your burdens down. Ooh, here in the Father's house. Take your shame at the door. 'Cause it ain't well.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to turn my clicker on. Well, it's great to be here today. You guys have given me such a warm, lovely welcome. Thank you. And not just warm as in physically warm, as in friendly. It struck me as quite, I don't know whether it's ironic or meaningful that I am here today to speak about climate change in the midst of one of the hottest heat waves we have ever experienced and are about to experience. So when the red weather warning hit on Friday for the next 2 days, it just made me think, like Ryan was saying, about how we're not set up for this kind of heat, but also that this kind of level of change is happening all around the world. So although countries might be adapted to really warm conditions, they're not used to the change in rains or the increase in tropical storms or the droughts that they're experiencing. So we are getting a taste of something that's been happening around the world for the past, say, 10 years, where people have begun to see the impact of the fact the world has already warmed by 1 degree. And I know throughout this week, you've been looking at ways that you can care for creation, some steps that you can take. And for those of you who've been watching the videos, this little kind of image might be quite familiar to you. And you've maybe been thinking about how it might feel to live with limited resources that many people around the world currently already do. So I wonder, for those who did participate in the challenge, what has been the most challenging bit for you? Does anyone want to share about how they found it? Yeah. Do you want to shout out and then I'll just, if other people... I've got a leaking tap. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So for those listening... Yeah. Brilliant. So for those who are watching online, there's been no boiler for 2 weeks, and then with a leaking tap, we filled a bucket 3 times a day to water the garden, which is just amazing because it's not been raining, has it? So the gardens needed the water. Yeah. Yeah, my grass is very brown too. But so the plants are doing okay, and then looking at investing in grey water system, which is brilliant. And just thinking about when you you turn the tap on to make it cold, particularly because you want a cold drink right now, so you let it run, just collecting that water is like, you never really think about it, but it just goes down the drain, doesn't it? And it's fresh, clean water that we could use for something else. I expect that we might end up in a hose pipe ban at some point during this summer, so it's probably useful to think about it. Anyone else? Yes. Mm. Yeah. Brilliant. So cutting back on plastic, it's tricky when you shop online, and yeah, you can't get things in loose, and so you end up with lots of plastic, which you can recycle, but you want to cut back in the first place. That's great, yeah, to use them as rubbish bags. That's a good plan. Anyone else have anything that was challenged? Yes?
On Monday, I run extra kilometers.
Oh, I heard about this.
Instead of drive from woods there and back, run and then run back and ride back. So I decided to run there and back. So I added about 7 kilometers to my 10 kilometers run.
Wow.
And the kids had appointments, repetition. And because I had to run, I was a bit late, so we made late repetitions. But we decided like, no, we're going to be about 5 minutes late, but we want to walk there. And we've been, there and back, and not into the traffic the whole day. And
Well
it was
done.
really good to, just understand that you can actually do it, at least a day.
Yeah.
And then on Tuesday, we had a water challenge, and I think between all of us, we used about 40 liters of water for shower and flushing and cooking, washing up. And then we measured 50 liters of water and see how far we take us. It was just really interesting to see how much we actually can spend in a day. We measured the shower. It took about 7 seconds to fill up a liter.
Wow.
And we thought, my goodness, if we're having a shower for 10 minutes, that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
It's just good to be, self-conscious of how much we actually waste and how much we can actually save.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. So the car-free challenge, amazing. And so thinking about traveling extra instead of driving to a run, running to a run, which is a lot more kilometers in the heat, and then walking to the opticians to make sure that you can still do a car-free day. I think it's always interesting if you challenge yourself to do that you realize that there's quite a lot of places we can walk, but we just drive out of convenience, or we don't think about getting public transport. And then the water challenge again, amazing. A litre of water, how long in a shower? 7 seconds. Gosh. So you think about, I'll have a shower, that's better than a bath. But if you've got like quite a powerful shower or one of those big rain heads, it's a lot of water. So shorter showers. I'm thinking about that. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, exactly. Quick, run in and run out. You just need to make it really cold. Don't have a boiler on, and then you'll have cold water. And it'll be quite nice, won't it? Oh, great. Well done for all of you who did the challenge. And for those of you who didn't quite manage to do it, you can still watch the videos online and try and do it in the next few weeks. And the other thing just to think about is maybe there's one day that you found particularly challenging, or one thing that you thought, gosh, this is a bit different. Maybe try and think about how you can distill that into your everyday and take that forward as a small step, because each of those small steps, as you will have worked out throughout the week, make a huge difference. So I hope that as you've gone through this, you feel ready today to think about climate change. And obviously the current climate is making us think about it as well. But for many people, this is more than just a week-long challenge. Some of it, people, it's a really daily reality. And today, I want to talk to you to give you the opportunity to take the next step beyond what you've already been doing, and to think about what else you can do to help people around the world who are being impacted by climate change already. So some of you will have these on your seats or near you. And again, it's a familiar image from this week. And we will come to this later, but I just want to draw your attention to it now so you know that it's here. But first, I want to talk to you about home. What is home? It's a funny thing, isn't it? It's either where you live. Some people say home is where the heart is, where your family are or where your friends are, or a place you feel safe. a place where hopefully you want to be? Or is our home this world that we live in? Let me tell you about what's been happening in my home over the heat wave. Let's see if we can get this. Oh, back. There we are. Over our home, we live in New Malden, which is about 6 miles away, just up the A3. Over our home this week, we've had cracks appearing, or cracks that are getting bigger. And that's because we have a chronic case of subsidence in our house. Yeah, I hear the groans. You feel my pain. So that means there's big roots of a tree that's behind our house in a park, not a tree we own, that is sucking up water from the soil under our house and causing it to shrink. So when it gets dry, they suck all the moisture out of the clay soil and cause the house to crack and move. It's something we began to notice in the very hot and dry summer of 2018. And unfortunately, it's not yet fixed, but we're quite used to living with our cracks. And when I tell people, you guys just demonstrated this perfectly, when I tell people we have subsidence, I'm usually greeted with a groan or a gasp. And many of you know it is quite costly to fix, and in some cases it means that you might lose your home, that it becomes uninhabitable and unsafe to live in. So I am going to do a little demonstration. I need 7 volunteers. Great, keen already, come on down. So, yep, and yes, so just to make sure you're not allergic to malted milk, biscuits, Smarties or icing. Great, fine. Okay, come on in. So we need you in a little line at the front, if that's okay. Yeah, you two come down. So we've got 4. Yep, come on. 5. Anyone else? Adults can volunteer if they would like. Yes, come on. 6, 7. Is that 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 7? Great. Okay, come in a line at the front. You may have already seen what we've got for you. I want each person to hold a house. Okay. So you come and stand here. Yeah, maybe stand there so people can see you. Let's get everybody a house. And then hold your houses so everybody can see my wonderful handiwork. This was late last night, making biscuit houses. Yep. The things that you do for Tearfund. I worked for Tearfund for 10 years. I left a few years ago, and it just reminded me all the crazy things I used to do for Tearfund. Like make biscuit houses. Here we are. And last one. There you go. Good job. Okay, so we have 7 houses here, beautifully demonstrated by my volunteers. And for those who can't see, there's a little picture of what they should look like. So the reality is that the rise in temperature and changing climate means that the risk of subsidence, so houses falling down, is a simple way to put it, in the UK is going to triple by 2050. And over half the homes, I'm sorry to say, in the southeast will be at risk of subsidence. That little graph shows you 2030 to 2070. So by 2030, over half the homes in the southeast will be at risk of subsidence. So we've got 7 houses here, over half of 7 houses. How many is that, guys? 4. Okay, so can you hold your biscuit house really strongly? No, there we go. Good holding, everyone. Oh, dear. Okay. So we've got 4 houses that have fallen down. How do you guys feel about your beautiful houses? You okay?
Sad. I live in that house.
No. I mean, at least you still have a little bit to shelter under there. It's just not got a roof. So, well done. Okay, so it's a bit of a scary thought, isn't it, about how climate's impacting us here in the UK. But thankfully, we have buildings insurance, and if I had a magic wand, I would wave my magic wand over the houses I've just broken, and they would get fixed, because most of us have building insurance, so they can be fixed and restored and maybe underpinned. That's what I'm hoping will happen to our house. But a recent report also showed that in the next 30 years, about 1 billion people in the world, do you guys know how many people live in the world? 7 billion, nearly 8 billion, but we'll work on 7. That means 1 in 7 people of these 1 billion people will have to leave everything behind. Oh no! We might need to collect the crumbs later. So 1 billion people by 2030 will become what we call a climate refugee, which means that their home, where they live, the area they live in, will become completely inhabitable for anybody to be able to live, which means that they completely lose their home and they have nothing. How does that feel?
That's not nice. That's my house.
Your house is gone because of climate change. And so by 2030, that's in less than 10 years, 1 in 7 people in the world are going to be homeless. They will have nothing. They will be climate refugees. And it might not be that they don't have a home, they don't even have a place to live to build their home because it'll be flooded or unable to live there. Right, well done, guys. You can take your biscuit houses, slightly broken, sorry, home. Well done, yes. Good job. Hopefully people can enjoy munching on those. I'm sorry, I wish they were ice lollies. That might be better. So some of you may remember, this is like pre-pandemic days, so a long time ago now, or it feels like a long time ago. March 2019, Cyclone Idai made landfall on Mozambique, which is in sub-Saharan Africa. It left devastation in its wake across Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. It impacted over 3 million people. 1.5 million of them were in Mozambique. Over 100,000 homes were either completely destroyed or damaged, as seen in this image, where they're completely flooded. Over 1,500 people died, 2,000 were injured, and countless more people had to leave their homes, and their way of living was completely lost. It is one of the worst recorded tropical storms to hit Africa. And the severity and frequency of these extreme natural disasters, such as cyclones, hurricanes, and droughts, are increasing due to climate change. Just as we have more heat waves, unfortunately, some places in the world, the impact is far more extreme. I visited Mozambique less than 6 months after the cyclone hit. The homes were still destroyed. Families were torn apart, and communities changed forever. There were giant gaping holes where there had once been roads. From the plane landing, I saw huge palm trees flattened like matchsticks. And time again, the people I met told me how they were only just able to plant crops 6 months after the cyclone, and they wouldn't have a harvest for another 6 months. How they'd lost their maize or their rice in silos during the cyclone, or when it was growing in the fields. And they were hungry. They were reliant on people giving them food aid, and they were going to be reliant for another 6 months because their food wasn't going to come to harvest. They couldn't make ends meet. Climate change isn't just a sciencey thing, not just with graphs and numbers. It's something that's impacting people here and now. So Catherine Hayhoe is a Christian climate scientist. She lives in America. And she says, climate change is not only an environmental issue. Climate change is a poverty issue. It's a hunger issue. It's an issue of inequality and injustice. It's a human issue. And that is why we care. So in the midst of the pain and suffering around the world, where is Jesus? And what does God have to say about this? What does it mean for us as followers of Jesus at this time? Well, let's go back to the beginning, the very beginning. In the beginning, in Genesis chapter 1, in the first few pages of the Bible, we hear the story of creation. What I want us to notice in the first chapter, is we pay particular attention to the phrase, "and God saw that it was good." Throughout the chapter, it is mentioned 5 times in verses 10, 12, 18, 21, and 25. As God created the seas and the sky, the mountains, the birds, and the bugs, God stopped and said it was good. And then, at the end of the chapter, and the end of this story, God created us human beings, and the chapter ends with verse 31. It says, God saw all that he had made, not just humans, all of it, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. You see, together, all of God's creation, humankind, the mountains, the sea, the animals, the bugs, spiders, all of it is very good, because we are made in God's image. The trouble is, we're not often told the story of goodness. We're told the story of original sin. But sin doesn't come first, goodness comes first. The image of God comes first. God's story, our story, is a story of everything, begins with original goodness. God didn't make a bad world. Sin is a stain upon the fabric. It is not the fabric itself. So what's gone wrong? At the fall, there were some key relationships broken. And at Tearfund, we refer to these 4 relationships as broken relationships that need restoration. There is the relationship between humankind and God, which was broken as Adam and Eve hid from God in the Garden of Eden. The relationship of harmony with ourselves was broken as Adam and Eve noticed their nakedness and felt shame. The relationship with one another was broken as Adam and Eve blamed each other. And finally, our relationship with God's whole of creation was broken as they left the Garden of Eden and the land was cursed. The goodness of this world depends upon relationships. God's creation is relational. And if these relationships thrive, we thrive and all of creation thrives. But the climate emergency is the latest in a series of significant symptoms that point to how broken our relationships are. Our broken relationships with creation and one another. But it was never meant to be this way. And thankfully, we have Jesus as the restorer of all things, a restorer of these relationships. He makes all things new. And it can be overwhelming to get our heads around such a huge issue like the climate emergency. Where do we start? It's a giant global problem, but it has very human faces. Individual stories of people's lives affected and families struggling to survive. People like Helena. So I met Helena on my trip to Mozambique. She has lived through a civil war. She's fled her home. She's returned back to her home. When she returned home, her and her family struggled to survive on farming and the occasional money her husband would bring through by helping the local fishermen. And then over time, after she's dealt with the trauma of the civil war in Mozambique, as she's struggling to provide for her family, things began to get harder and harder to get a good harvest. The rains either came too heavy or they don't come at all. Helena and her family are extremely vulnerable to climate change. They are hit by cyclones and droughts. And the area she lives in is very sandy and dry. It's hard work to make things grow. But as part of Tearfund's partner, Sadie's, who were doing some training in her local church, she studied the passage, the feeding of the 5,000. Who knows that story? Yep, it's a very well-known one. It's very important because it appears in all 4 Gospels. And so we're going to read it from Mark. By this time, it was late in the day. So his disciples came to him. Jesus is teaching to a whole crowd of people. And they say, "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. And he also divided the fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Thank you. I've got one here, but it's sneakily hidden. But I'll go through both of them. There are so many things we can learn from this passage. And Tearfund partners use this around the world and many other Bible studies to help people consider what their role is about bringing about change. They're reminded that when you meet a great need, something that can seem so overwhelming, the temptation can be to send the hungry crowd away, to ignore it and turn your back on it. Sometimes when we see a great need, like the impact of climate change, you can be tempted to send it away, to turn your back on it. But in this example, Jesus responds to the disciples' request with, "You give them something to eat." As followers of Jesus, we are asked by him, what are you going to do about it? Immediately, their response is about how much it would cost to solve this problem. More than half a year's wages. Well, I think it'll cost more than half a year's wages to solve the problem of climate change. But Jesus doesn't deal with their logistics or their concern about whether it's a waste of money. He asks them, "What do you have?" And he tells them to go and see. They come back with such a teeny amount, 5 loaves, 2 fish, something so small in their hand in comparison to the scale of the problem. But Jesus takes that tiny amount, he blesses it, and he gives it to the disciples to distribute. And we all know what happens. A miracle was done, and there are basketfuls left over. And all the people were satisfied. Jesus is performing the miracle, but the disciples, they get to be involved in it just by coming with what they have, and they get to distribute it out. Jesus involves them in what he's doing. And upon studying this passage, Helena considered what she had in her hand, what she could bring to the table, what she could bring to Jesus so that he could perform the miraculous. So through Tearfund's partners training, Helena was taught about her relationship with creation and how to care for it. She was taught about drought-resistant and sustainable farming techniques, and she was encouraged to use what she had in her hand. At first, it was things like a plastic bottle, which had holes in the bottom to act as a watering can. It was leaves and grass that were used to mulch around the plants to protect them from the heat and keep the water in. And it was bat poo that they used as a fertilizer around the plants. And when I saw Helena's farm, what I saw was restoration. The land that Helena farmed with others was like an oasis in the midst of a desert. As I approached through what was very dry, dusty bush, maybe a little bit like what the grass looks like out here, I saw green, lush green. Stepping into the farm, there were rows of corn, peppers, kale, leafy green plants in the midst of what felt like a desert. Helena is no longer using old plastic bottles with holes in it to water them. Now she has shiny watering cans. Her and her community have been able to sell the excess plants that they have grown to buy watering cans and much more. Helena's family more than survive now. They thrive in the midst of the climate emergency. It says in Colossians 1:19-20, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." We've said that Jesus has come to bring about the restoration, to reconcile himself to all things, which includes things here on earth. This fullness of restoration is made complete in Jesus, but its outworking involves each one of us as we look to Jesus and to follow him, as he asks us, what do you have? And this is exactly what Helena did. Equipped with what she had in her hand, her faith, and a new way of farming. And you can see the luscious green there is with the cabbages and the maize, and very, very far back you can see some trees and some brown, which was basically the land surrounding it. You see, poverty isn't God's plan. You are. We are. We all get to play a part. We can be salt and light, and we can join in his ministry of reconciliation and the renewal of all things. So though the climate crisis can seem quite overwhelming, a bit like a really big hungry crowd, and the solutions seem big and costly, way more than half a year's wages, we can take heart that Jesus is in the business of restoration. And just like the disciples, we get to be part of it. All Jesus asks us to do is look at what we have in our hand. I have met many people whilst I worked at Tearfund who have been impacted by our partners' work. And the striking thing is they often talk about a time where they had no hope, when the future was bleak and all they could do was focus on getting through day by day. But when I ask about now, do they have hope? They all say yes. And usually it's a really big dream. Helena's hope, she told me, was to build a new home. This is her current home. She wanted a house made of bricks and mortar, one that won't fall down when the cyclones hit, one with firm foundations. And through the work that she is doing in her farming, she will be able to afford bricks and concrete to make a home that is safe for her family for the future generations. The changes you make this week will make a big difference to your children, to your grandchildren, to people around the world in the long term. But we also know that damage has already been done. People who are living in poverty have very little hope, who are already increasingly vulnerable to climate change. So whilst you invest in the future, I want to ask, will you take action today to support those who are feeling the effects now? People like Helena, who had very little hope, and who by day, it was getting harder and harder to support her family. It says on your card, on your seat on the back, what does the Lord require of you? It's quoting Micah 6:8, which is a very familiar passage to many of us. Let me ask you today, what does the Lord require of you? What do you have in your hand? May I humbly suggest that by supporting what God is already doing around the world through Tearfund's partners, you could be taking a step to bring about restoration, to help people like Helena. Thank you so much for those who already support Tearfund and for what you do. £16 a month over a year has the ability to restore an entire community that's been devastated by the climate crisis. Our worldwide network of partners, working in about over 50 countries, work through local churches to deliver practical solutions. Things like new farming techniques like Helena's, or tree planting, or improved waste management and access to more reliable water sources. When you sign up to support this kind of work, Tearfund sends you some wonderful, hope-filled stories about more people whose lives have already been transformed and whose futures look brighter because of the support of people just like you, making a whole world of difference. Now, I'm not on Tearfund's payroll anymore, so I can say this with full confidence, that when you give to Tearfund, they steward your resources extremely well. In that organisation, they know that the money that they are spending to make a difference to people's lives has come from the pockets of people in churches around the UK who are extremely generous. And we give it to God to enable him to do a miracle. And so from such a tiny amount, doesn't have to be £16, it can be £5, it can be £1, it can be anything. We begin to see transformation and restoration. And when we're asking you to give on a regular basis, the reason we do that is because it helps us plan our income and it helps us respond. So when Cyclone Idai hit, we didn't need to immediately fundraise and ask people to give us money there and then. We had money set aside ready to respond to emergency. And those emergencies are happening more frequently. And then we're able to then bring the additional money in to help in the long term. So I just want to ask you, will you consider starting giving to Tearfund today? If you do feel ready to give, you can fill in one of these forms, or you can do it online. You can visit tearfund.org/change. There's a QR code up there. I think there's probably one in here. Everybody's fancy with those things nowadays. We have seen that inequality exists because of broken relationships. And we've also seen that hope is very much alive, even in the midst of what seems like a huge, scary situation. And we have the opportunity as followers of Jesus to bring about healing in this world, whether that's what we do personally or whether that's what we sow into and give to. We can be part of God's solution to restore relationships. So I want to pray a blessing over you. Some of you, this may be familiar to you, but it's a Franciscan blessing that I hope fits with the hope that we have that things can change. Let's pray. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, injustice, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe we can make a difference in the world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen. I think the Paul worship band are coming up to have it be a bit more hot. Is that right? It's quite warm up here. So I need to...
Welcome back to the heat bowl.
Precious blood has left me forgiven, pure like the whitest of snow, powerful to make sin and shame retreat. This covenant is making me whole, so I will rise and lift my head, for The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Purify my heart in your presence. Teach me to discover the joy of holiness that forms as you draw me close. In you what was lost is restored. So I will rise and lift my head, for by his mercy my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Precious blood. Precious blood has left me forgiven, pure like the whitest of snow, powerful to make sin and shame retreat. This covenant is making me whole. So I will rise and lift my head, for by his mercy my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Purify my heart in your presence. Teach me to discover the joy of holiness that forms as you draw me close. In you what was lost is restored. So I will rise and lift my head, for by his mercy my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. So I will rise and lift my head, for by his mercy my life was spared. The highest name has set me free. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean. Because of Jesus, my heart is clean.
Turn into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. Our God is greater. Our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer. Awesome in power. Our God. Our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? What could stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what could stand against? Then what could stand against? Okay.
Look inside the mystery. See the empty cross. See the risen Savior, victorious and strong.
No one else above him, none as strong to save. He alone has conquered the power grave.
Glory Have a good week. Stay cool.